there stood an old barbershop with a faded maroon wooden sign. Hanging in the front window was a simple notice. It read, "Free haircut for veterans." The shop owner, Emily Carter, a 32-year-old woman, had been running this barbershop on her own for the past 5 years. Though she lived a modest life, Emily was known for her gentle heart. She made it a habit to offer free haircuts to veterans who walked through her door. To her, it was a small gesture of respect for those who had once fought for the country. That morning, a light drizzle covered the streets of the town. A cold breeze swept through the air, keeping most people indoors. Still, Emily opened her shop as usual. She arranged the chairs, wiped down the large mirror on the wall, and switched on a small radio that softly played jazz music. From time to time, she glanced out the window. The streets were quiet, with only a few people passing by under umbrellas. Yet, for some reason, Emily felt a sense of unease in her heart that morning, as if something unusual was about to happen. The clock hands pointed to 9:15. Just as Emily was about to sit behind the cashier's desk, the small bell above the door rang sharply. An elderly man stepped inside slowly. His body was slightly hunched, and he wore a long, worn-out coat. In one hand, he held a wooden cane. His hair and beard were thick and unkempt. Emily greeted him with a warm smile and immediately stood up to welcome him. "Good morning. Please, come in. Would you like a haircut?" she asked kindly. The old man gave a small nod. His voice was deep as he replied, "Yes, if I may. I saw the sign in the window. It said, 'For veterans.'" Emily nodded. "That's right. Please have a seat, sir. Are you a veteran?" The old man slowly walked to the barber chair and sat down gently. "My name is Robert Miller. I used to serve a long time ago," he said softly. Emily sensed there was something profound behind the man's words. Without saying much more, she began preparing her tools. In her heart, she was determined to give this man her best service. As she started trimming his hair, Emily spoke softly. "If you don't mind, sir, while I cut your hair, may I hear a bit of your story?" Mr. Miller gave a faint smile. "It's been a long time since I've told anyone. But perhaps today is the right day," he answered with a hoarse voice. And at that moment, without them realizing it, the beginning of an extraordinary day was unfolding inside that small barbershop. As Emily carefully moved the scissors to Mr. Miller's thick hair, the small barbershop seemed even quieter than usual. Outside, the drizzle continued to fall, tapping gently against a glass window. Inside, the soft hum of the radio and the rhythmic sound of the scissors filled the space. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mr. Miller let out a quiet sigh. "I used to be a commander," he began slowly. "Served in the Army for many years. But after retirement, well, life became very quiet." Emily glanced at him through the mirror, her hands continuing their work. "A commander? That's very honorable, sir," she said gently. Mr. Miller gave a faint nod, his gaze distant. "War changes you. After it's over, many of us just disappear. I have no family left. Most of my old comrades are gone. Nowadays, I just walk around town. No one really notices an old man anymore." His words struck a chord in Emily's heart. There was a deep loneliness behind them. She paused for a second, then spoke warmly. "Well, you are noticed here, Mr. Miller, and you are very welcome any time in this shop." A small smile touched the corners of Mr. Miller's mouth. It was a smile that hadn't appeared in a long while. "Thank you, Emily. It means more than you know," he said softly. They continued the haircut in a comfortable silence. As Emily trimmed his beard, she couldn't help but notice the worn-out patches on Mr. Miller's coat, the faded metals barely hanging on his lapel. He had clearly been through much, yet there was still a quiet strength in his presence. When the haircut was nearly finished, Emily brewed a small pot of tea. She placed a warm cup in front of Mr. Miller and sat across from him at the small wooden table by the window. They talked for a while longer. Mr. Miller shared a few stories of his younger days, though he always spoke humbly, never mentioning details of any grand battles or honors. Emily listened intently, genuinely interested in his life. Before long, the rain outside began to ease. Mr. Miller stood up slowly, steadying himself with his cane. "You've given me more than just a haircut today, Emily," he said, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. "You gave me a place to be seen, a place to be remembered." Emily helped with his coat and smiled warmly. "It's my honor, Mr. Miller. Please come back any time. You'll always have a seat here." With a nod, Mr. Miller stepped out into the damp street. Just before he turned the corner, he looked back at the little barbershop and gave one last grateful wave. Emily watched him disappear down the street, her heart both warmed and curious. Somehow, she felt that this encounter was far from over. Something about the day still felt different. The next morning, Emily arrived at her barbershop a little earlier than usual. The sky was still overcast, though the rain had stopped. She couldn't shake the feeling from the day before. There was something about Mr. Miller's visit that stayed in her thoughts long after he had left. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of shaving cream and sandalwood greeted her. She went about her usual routine, sweeping the floor, arranging her tools, and turning on the radio. But her mind wandered back to Mr. Miller's quiet words. A few minutes later, as she was wiping down the barber chair, the phone behind the counter rang sharply. Emily walked over, picked it up. "Emily's Barbershop," she greeted. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then a deep, measured voice spoke. "Good morning. Is this the person who gave Mr. Robert Miller a haircut yesterday?" Emily blinked, surprised. Yes, that was me," she replied cautiously. The voice continued, calm but deliberate. "Thank you for your kindness to him. Please, keep your shop open today as usual. That's all." Before Emily could ask who was calling, the line disconnected. She stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, puzzled. Who would call just to say that? And how did they know about Mr. Miller's visit? Trying to shake off her curiosity, Emily returned to her work. Customers came and went throughout the morning, though her thoughts kept drifting back to the strange phone call. Around noon, a subtle change began to take place outside. Emily noticed more people than usual walking past her window. A few looked down the street with puzzled expressions. Then came the sound, a low, distant rumble. Not thunder, something heavier, steady, like engines, lots of them. Emily set down her scissors and walked to the front window. She saw several townsfolk now gathered along the sidewalks, all looking toward the far end of Main Street. The sound grew louder. The ground seemed to faintly tremble beneath her feet. Emily's heart began to race. What was happening? Just as she opened the shop door to step outside, she caught sight of something far down the street. Dark green military vehicles were approaching in formation, their headlights cutting through the gray afternoon light. Emily's breath caught. A strange sense of anticipation filled the air. Something was coming, and somehow it was heading straight for her little barbershop. Emily stood frozen in the doorway of her shop. The deep rumble of engines grew louder with each passing second. Townspeople were now lining both sides of the street, their faces filled with curiosity and confusion. From the distance, she could see them clearly now. A long column of dark green military trucks was approaching, their tires rolling steadily over the wet pavement. Behind them came several buses, also military. Soldiers in uniform sat inside, gazes focused ahead. Emily's heart pounded. Why were they coming here? What could possibly be happening? She glanced at her neighbors. No one seemed to know. People were whispering among themselves, pointing at the vehicles. Some were taking out their phones to record the scene. Then came the moment that made Emily's breath hitch. As the convoy drew closer, the first trucks began to slow down, right in front of her barbershop. One by one, the vehicles came to a stop along the street, engines idling, soldiers disembarking in neat formation. Dozens of them at first, then more. In perfect synchronization, the soldiers lined up across the sidewalk, facing her shop. Emily gripped the doorframe, trying to process what she was seeing. One of the soldiers, a tall man with captain's stripes on his uniform, stepped forward and looked directly at her. Without a word, he gave a small nod of respect. Emily could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on her now. Her small barbershop, which had always been a quiet place, had become the very center of attention in the entire town. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. What did this mean? Why were they here for her at that very moment? Another car, a black official sedan, turned the corner and pulled up in front of the shop. The door opened, and out stepped none other than Mayor Thomas, the town's mayor, flanked by 2 aides. Emily's pulse quickened even more. The mayor? What was going on? Mayor Thomas adjusted his coat, then made his way toward her with a calm, steady stride. He stopped just a few feet away from her and spoke in a voice that carried over the hushed crowd. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter," he said with a small smile. "We are here today to honor an act of kindness." Emily stared at him, utterly bewildered, before she could respond. Mayor Thomas turned to gathered soldiers and gestured toward them, and with that, the entire crowd seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with anticipation. Something was about to be revealed. Just moments earlier, before the convoy had arrived, Emily had still been thinking about that peculiar phone call from the morning. The deep voice had thanked her for giving Mr. Miller a haircut and told her to keep the shop open. Now, standing in the doorway with soldiers assembled before her and the mayor himself speaking to her, the meaning of that call seemed even more mysterious. Mayor Thomas continued, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "Yesterday, Miss Carter, you welcomed a man into your shop, a man who gave so much for this country, yet asked for nothing in return." Emily's throat tightened. Her thoughts instantly went to Mr. Miller. Mayor Thomas turned to the soldiers and nodded. They stood at perfect attention, eyes forward. "He may not have told you, Miss Carter, but Robert Miller is no ordinary veteran," the mayor said slowly. "He was once the commander of one of the most decorated units in the Army, a leader who saved countless lives during the hardest battles." A murmur rippled to the crowd of onlookers. Some gasped softly. Others exchanged glances, wide-eyed. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the doorway. She remembered the old man's modest words, how he had only said he was commander once, speaking with such humility. She had never imagined this. Mayor Thomas took a step closer to her. "Word of your kindness reached those who served under him, and today they have come to honor both their commander and you." At that moment, one of the large military buses parked nearby opened its doors. From within, a group of older veterans, many with medals pinned to their jackets, began to step out slowly, assisted by younger soldiers. And then there he was, Robert Miller himself. But this time, he wore his full-dress uniform, crisp and gleaming, with a chest full of medals that shone even in the gray afternoon light. He moved with quiet dignity, supported by his cane, flanked by 2 young soldiers. The street fell completely silent as everyone watched him approach. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Mr. Miller stopped in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a small but steady voice, Mr. Miller said, "I told you yesterday, I would not forget your kindness." Behind him, hundreds of soldiers stood in solemn formation, waiting. The air was electric with emotion, as if the whole town was holding its breath for what would happen next. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek. The sudden arrival of the military convoy had drawn more and more townspeople out of their homes and shops. Within minutes, the quiet street outside Emily's barbershop was lined with onlookers. Families stood on the sidewalks, children peering over their parents' shoulders. Phones were raised, capturing the scene as it unfolded. Emily barely noticed the growing crowd. Her focus remained on Mr. Miller, who now stood in full uniform before her. The sight of him, so dignified, so commanding, was almost surreal. Mayor Thomas turned once more to the gathered soldiers. "Prepare for honors," he called. The captain of the unit barked an order. In perfect unison, the soldiers snapped to attention. Rows upon rows of them, stretching down the length of Main Street, stood tall and resolute. Emily's heart pounded. The gravity of the moment pressed in on her. Mr. Miller glanced toward her with a warm, knowing smile. "You treated me as a person, Emily, not as a forgotten relic," he said quietly. "Most would have looked right past me. But you saw me." Emily felt her throat tighten. She struggled to find words. "It was the least I could do," she finally whispered. "You've given so much. It was an honor." Mr. Miller nodded once. Then he slowly turned toward the soldiers. With a commanding voice that seemed to erase the years, he spoke. "Company, present arms." In an instant, hundreds of soldiers raised their right hands in a crisp salute, directed not at him, but at Emily. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily stood frozen in shock. She had never imagined such a sight. An entire military unit, offering her a salute of respect and gratitude. Tears welled in her eyes. The emotion of the moment was overwhelming. The air seemed to shimmer with the collective breath of everyone present, as if the whole town shared this singular, unforgettable moment. And still, Emily sensed this was not the end. Something more was coming. The salute held for several long, breathless seconds. The stillness of the moment wrapped around the street like a blanket. Even the distant hum of engines seemed muted. Then came the next movement. At another sharp command from the captain, the soldiers lowered their arms and broke formation, only not to leave. Instead, they began to move forward, row by row, toward the small barbershop. Emily instinctively stepped back a little, watching in amazement. What was happening now? The soldiers weren't storming in. They weren't coming as a show of force. Each one entered quietly, respectfully, some carrying small boxes, others holding flowers, folded flags, or plaques. One by one, they filed through the doorway. Emily stood beside her barber chair, her heart racing as the soldiers gently began placing items on the counter, on the walls, on empty shelves. An American flag in a polished wooden frame. A bronze plaque that read, "In honor of kindness and service to those who served." A small shadow box filled with insignias from various military units. And photos. Photos of Mr. Miller's old unit, of younger faces that now looked older or had long since passed. As the space around her filled with these tokens of gratitude, Emily's eyes shimmered with tears. It was as if her little barbershop was being transformed, becoming a place of honor. Outside, more soldiers continued to line up. The street was now a sea of green and dress blues. And still, more vehicles were arriving. The convoy stretched farther than Emily could see. The townspeople stood in hushed reverence, watching the scene unfold. No one moved. No one spoke loudly. A few veterans from the town, some wearing faded jackets and old service caps, stepped forward with trembling hands to salute Mr. Miller, then quietly entered the shop to offer their own tributes. Emily barely had time to process it all. The barbershop that had always been her quiet refuge was now filled with history, with stories, with a living legacy of those who had once served under the man she had humbly given a free haircut. And in the center of it all stood Mr. Miller, his cane steady beneath him, his expression one of quiet pride and deep gratitude. Emily sensed that this day was far from over. Something else was still coming. As the soldiers continued to flow into the barbershop, placing their tokens of respect with quiet precision, the street outside grew more crowded. More townspeople had gathered. Some stood in clusters, whispering in awe. Others simply watched, their eyes wide with wonder. No one had ever seen anything like this in Willow Creek. The column of military vehicles stretched nearly the entire length of Main Street now. And then came another moment that made Emily's breath catch. A second black sedan approached slowly through the rows of parked military trucks. Its presence drew fresh murmurs from the crowd. This was no ordinary town car. It bore special plates. As it came to a stop near the front of the barbershop, the rear door opened. Out stepped a tall figure in an immaculate suit, Mayor Thomas. But he was not alone. Accompanying him were two high-ranking military officers, one from the Army, another from the National Guard. Emily stood frozen near her barber chair, hands lightly resting on the backrest. Her heart pounded. Mayor Thomas made his way through the respectful lines of soldiers and entered the shop. His expression was calm, but his eyes gleamed with solemn purpose. He approached Emily with an easy grace and extended his hand. "Ms. Carter," he said warmly, "you have done something very special, far more than you may realize." Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. I only gave him a haircut," she whispered. The mayor smiled gently. "You gave him dignity. You gave him kindness. And that has brought all of this here today." He turned slightly to gesture toward the crowd outside, and the officers beside him. These men and women did not come because they were ordered to. They came because word of what you did spread through old channels, through soldiers and veterans who still hold Mr. Miller in the highest regard. Emily's breath caught again. So many people for one small act? Mayor Thomas continued, his voice steady and filled with meaning. And they come not just to honor Mr. Miller, but to honor you for reminding them that even a simple gesture can mean the world to someone forgotten by time. He reached into his coat and withdrew a dark blue box. Opening it, he revealed a gleaming medal. The officers beside him stood at attention. By unanimous recommendation, Mayor Thomas said, and with full support from the Veterans Council and local military units, it is my privilege to present you with the Civic Medal of Honor for your compassion and service to those who served. A wave of emotion surged through Emily. Tears welled in her eyes. Her hands trembled as she accepted the medal. Outside, the crowd burst into respectful applause. The soldiers remained still, their eyes filled with quiet admiration. But Emily sensed this was not yet the final moment. The true heart of this day was still waiting to be revealed. The applause from outside slowly faded, replaced once more by a reverent silence. Inside the barbershop, Emily stood near the barber chair, her fingers gently brushing the medal that now hung around her neck. She glanced toward Mr. Miller, who stood proudly in his full dress uniform. His gaze met hers, warm and steady. Then Mayor Thomas spoke again, his voice carrying clearly to both the shop and the street beyond. There is one more thing the town should know. He turned toward Mr. Miller and gave a respectful nod. Mr. Robert Miller, would you do us the honor of telling your story? Mr. Miller leaned lightly on his cane. He looked at Emily, then at the soldiers and townspeople beyond the doorway. A deep breath. Then, in a voice that carried strength beyond his years, he began to speak. Many years ago, Mr. Miller said, I commanded a battalion during one of the harshest campaigns our country has known. The details of that time I have rarely shared. The crowd outside leaned in. Inside the shop, no one moved. Even the youngest soldiers stood still as stone. We were sent behind enemy lines, Mr. Miller continued, cut off, outnumbered, running low on supplies. His voice remained calm, but the weight of memory filled every word. I was responsible for the lives of over 200 soldiers, he said. And through decisions made, sacrifices taken, we made it out. Every last one of them. A murmur of a rippled through the crowd. Many of those who served with me are no longer here, Mr. Miller said softly. But those who remain and those who followed in their footsteps carry the bond of that survival. He looked once more at Emily. And yesterday, he said, in this small shop, for the first time in many years, I was treated not as a forgotten old man, but as someone who mattered. Emily blinked rapidly, tears threatening to spill. Mr. Miller straightened slightly. His voice grew stronger. I did not call them, he said, gesturing to the sea of soldiers outside. They heard, and they came. Not for me alone, but for the reminder that kindness still lives in this world. A hush fell across the entire street. No one spoke. No one moved. The soldiers, the mayor, the townsfolk, all stood witness to the words of a man whose story had finally been told. And in that moment, the truth of the day became clear. This gathering was not simply for a haircut. It was for the unseen bonds of respect, service, and humanity that one small act had brought into the light. But still, Emily could feel it in her heart. The day was building toward one final moment. The true culmination was yet to come. A gentle breeze swept through Main Street, carrying with it the weight of everything that had unfolded. Soldiers stood in formation. Townspeople remained gathered in respectful silence. Inside the barbershop, Emily stood beside Mr. Miller, her heart full. Her small shop now gleamed with medals, plaques, and symbols of service. Yet an air of anticipation remained. Mayor Thomas glanced toward the captain of the unit. A subtle nod passed between them. The captain turned sharply and gave a crisp command. Honor guard, prepare. Outside, the formation shifted. Rows of soldiers moved with precision, clearing a central path down the street. And then the sound came. From somewhere beyond the far end of Main Street, a deep rumble echoed through the town. At first faint, then rising, growing louder with each passing second. The crowd turned, eyes widened, phones were raised again. Emily stepped to the doorway, her breath catching. Above the rooftops, 3 massive military helicopters came into view, flying in tight formation. The distinctive thump-thump-thump of their rotors filled the air. But it wasn't just helicopters. Moments later, a squadron of military jeeps and motorcycles appeared, engines roaring, banners fluttering in the wind, and in the skies above, a sudden roar split the air. 4 fighter jets streaked overhead in perfect formation, their sleek forms glinting against the gray clouds. The entire town gasped. Children pointed to the sky. Veterans in the crowd stood at attention, saluting as the jets performed a slow flyover. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. The sight was overwhelming. Beside her, Mr. Miller watched with quiet pride. His voice was soft but steady. "They did not forget," he said. "Not me, not the ones who served. And now not you." As the jets disappeared into the distance, the military jeeps came to a stop in front of the barbershop. One final moment remained. The soldiers closest to Emily parted, forming a path. At the end of that path, a young soldier in dress uniform approached, carrying a folded American flag in a glass case. With careful steps, the soldier entered the shop and presented the flag to Emily. "For your service," the young soldier said solemnly, "to those who served." Emily accepted the flag with trembling hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. The crowd erupted in applause, cheers mixed with reverent silence. Above them all, the echo of the flyover still hung in the air, a final salute to the woman who had unknowingly reminded the town and its soldiers of the power of kindness. And so, in the heart of Willow Creek, in a small barbershop that had once seemed ordinary, an extraordinary chapter of respect, honor, and humanity was written, one that would never be forgotten.